Have you ever wished you could go back in time? If you could, what would you see? Would it be the days of old that you've read about, the fanciful movie version, or one just spawned by your own imagination? Or is the past still right here with us today, ready to tell us its secrets? These century-old reminders help us to look back, telling their own unique stories, now memories. We would like to take you back in time. Through the stories and recollections of its citizens, we'll visit the city of Bath, Maine in the year 1897. Through their eyes, we'll see how life really was. Perhaps not the stuff of Hollywood movies, but instead a family dinner table discussion, stories and traditions handed down from father to son, mother to daughter. Through their eyes, we can look back and ahead. The Times Record is proud to present our video snapshot of life in Bath, Maine in 1897.
I believe that in my grandfather's time, Bath was probably a more colorful place than it is today. The signage in the city was more colorful. They thought nothing of hanging banners the entire length of Front Street, announcing everything from circuses to political rallies. Politics were taken very seriously, unlike today. It was a really serious thing with those folks. I think the perception that these were a drab, brown people dressed in black and brown isn't the case.
We had everything. Bowling alleys and 2 theaters, vaudeville, baseball.
Now on the streets of Bath, and my grandchildren won't believe this when I tell them about that, you couldn't walk the streets without bumping shoulder to shoulder. Saturday night in the city of Bath would be pretty crowded.
Stores were open, of course, on Saturday night. The farmers from all around came in, did their shopping at that time. Every neighborhood, even in my day, had a little grocery store. People didn't have automobiles to go get the groceries, and they would go to the neighborhood store and carry them home every day.
Bath was, in fact, the shopping center of the whole region. It was the county seat, which gave it a certain amount of political clout. It had a wide variety of commercial operations going on in Bath. There was department stores, there were all sorts of specialty stores, there were food markets, fish markets, you know, the usual hardware stores and so forth, although many of them tended to include in their repertoire some sort of a connection to shipbuilding. J.A. Winslow Company, they advertised themselves as house plumbers and ship plumbers.
I now look back on the beauty of Bath. Beautifully designed houses, beautifully furnished houses. What added to the beauty of the whole area were these magnificent elms on Washington Street, North Street, High Street, wherever in Bath. I think a Navy man or a sailor or a captain, one of his joys was keeping a house look spick and span.
The horses and teams, the wooden sidewalks, all these curious kinds of barber poles sticking out of the ground everywhere, dogs running loose. The smell of the place would have been very different. In a day of great sensitivity, I'm not so sure we would have enjoyed it.
Communication went around. The town had its own network of information, so that a rumor would spread in the morning, and by the time it was printed in the afternoon paper, it was pretty well known.
It was a simpler time. Horses were used for everything, carrying people in the early days. They had a small Bath horse-drawn passenger service that went up and down the streets. All the goods moved around town with horses. Wagons delivered products and services. The horses were also used, of course, for work. In the wintertime, they often were used to plow the streets. So a lot of stores of many different kinds, the big ones up on Front Street, of course, and then down Center Street, and some of the smaller ones. And there was one owned by the Pecci family. It was a fruit market. Could easily have been an Italian restaurant, because Mrs. Pecci was a master at Italian cooking.
I always get mad when I go buy a pizza. I get mad because my stepmother was the greatest cook, and she could make bread. They call this junk pizzas that you sell, they buy in these stores.
And you know, as fate would have it, the Pecci family store is now a pizza parlor down there on Center Street.
The Percy brothers ran a fine store. Up on the corner of Center Street in front was Thompson's. They ran a fine men's store. Between the two was Hallett's and the drugstore, and Page, the jeweler. They were all top grade fine stores.
Well, looking back at the schools in the late 1800s or early 1900s, I think their mission was to teach the 3 R's. And a little bit about the world outside. It's hard for us to picture the schools in those days, one grade being in one room, another grade in another room, and the teacher in those rooms teaching all the various subjects. The teachers back in the good old days were not jacks of all trade, but Janes of all trade, I guess you could call them.
Our schools in the early days were excellent. Just gifted ladies that devoted their lives to the kids of Bath.
Well, I don't know if I can really tell you about women's role in society, except that they were generally mostly mothers and grandmothers and housewives, and a few of them had jobs, but not too many that I remember of. They were always busy bringing up their children and grandchildren and sewing clothing and things of that sort. They worked 24 hours a day.
I remember that my mother used to, she didn't come over till she was married, you know, she lived in Canada, but she used to do all the cooking, made homemade bread, and, you know, always did, and did the regular things around, work. And she always made her own donuts and things. And she worked hard, she really did. She was a good mother.
She was a saint, if there ever was one. My grandmother was a saint. And she was very good to me. And she did write poetry. There wasn't anything my grandmother couldn't do. She made quilts. She hooked rugs, she made braided rugs, and I have quite a few of her poems that she has written. The cross, rock of ages, that to me means the cross on Calvary. It will never fade away, but through endless ages stay.
Sunday was a day of rest. Sunday was a day for the churches. The churches were really important in setting the tone, the moral tone for the town.
I know they worked very long hours. In my grandfather's time, they worked 10 hours a day, six days a week. So spare time was was rare, although I remember him telling me that the city had a lot of holidays. There were a lot of special events that the city put on that they don't do today. And there were more amusements. Steamers, this type of thing, excursions. Picnics were a big thing.
Well, what stands out mostly in my mind, of course, you had the sociability as far as farmers were concerned was the Grange, and then you were pretty neighborly back in those days because most of your sociability, like evenings or anything like that, even weekends, was amongst your neighbors. People dropped in, spent some time, played cards, you know, like that.
There was a 12-piece band in Winnegans called the Winnegans Band. One trip they took was they loaded the band onto a gondola, which is a rectangular flat scow-shaped hull with a mast on it usually and a sail, and they sailed to the head of Winnegans Creek to the Indian Carry, and they walked just a short distance up a hill to the farm occupied by James Perry and his new bride. They serenaded the newlyweds, and after a visit, why, they again got aboard the gondola to come back down to Winnegans. And they ran into a severe rainstorm. Everybody got wet. One man slipped on the deck and fell through the bass drum, which was a great calamity at the time.
I don't think they had much spare time, actually, my grandparents. Their entertainment was largely whenever they had the opportunity, visiting with neighbors and getting together. Maybe a sing-along. I know they had a piano. I can remember they had one of the early Edison phones to play those tubular records.
Bath produced an internationally famous opera singer. She was very active in 1897. Her name was Emma Ames. She grew up in Bath. She graduated from the Bath High School, sang as a youngster here in Bath. There was something very special about her voice. She sang at the Met. She even sang in a command performance at Windsor Castle one day in Romeo and Juliet. She was probably most famous for her role in Juliet. Very few people in Bath ever heard her sing because she didn't sing when she came back here for the most part. Everybody, however, knew her name because the Times wrote about her a lot.
Later, she returned to Bath and lived on North Street, right next door to the publisher of the Times.
When she died, she got one of the largest gravestones in Oak Grove Cemetery.